The story begins with a young man named Encrid sleeping inside a rough military camp, while someone walks around waking the soldiers. A man sitting beside him keeps complaining about a bug inside his boot, and the noise annoys Encrid as he slowly opens his eyes. He introduces himself and reveals that he is only an ordinary squad leader, leading useless soldiers on a brutal battlefield. Suddenly, Encrid finds himself standing in the middle of a deadly war. He charges forward with his sword and attacks the enemy with everything he has. Even though he fights desperately, the enemies quickly overpower him from every direction. His sword slips from his hand, and before he can recover, an enemy soldier rushes toward him and drives a blade through his throat. As blood pours from his mouth, Encrid realizes how pathetic his death truly is. He remembers how he trained endlessly for years, without any natural talent or special powers. Despite everyone mocking his impossible dream, he still believed that as long as he held a sword in his hand, he could someday become a true knight. However, on this battlefield, that dream finally comes crashing down in the worst possible way. Then, Encrid suddenly wakes up again inside the same camp. The same soldier beside him complains about the bug in his boot exactly as before. Confused and disturbed, Encrid starts wondering if he is experiencing déjà vu. Soon, the exact same events repeat again and again. Every battle ends with the enemy sword piercing his throat, the burning pain, and the blood spilling from his mouth. Encrid slowly realizes that this horrifying day keeps repeating endlessly. Encrid watches the enemy soldier rush toward him once again, with a perfect thrust aimed directly at his throat. He immediately recognizes the movement because he has already seen the same deadly attack 17 times before. As the sharp blade approaches him, he thinks about how every one of those deaths feels completely real, from the burning pain to the blood pouring from his mouth. He wonders if things could have changed if he had trained harder or swung his sword with even greater effort. At that moment, a mysterious voice suddenly echoes through the darkness and questions whether he truly believes effort alone can overcome every obstacle. A strange figure appears before him and urges him to struggle more, before finally accepting the despair of facing a wall he can never surpass. Before Encrid can understand what is happening, he suddenly wakes up again in the same military camp. The morning repeats exactly as before. Rem, the soldier beside him, acts shocked because Encrid wakes up unusually fast this time. Encrid calmly mentions the bug hiding inside Rem's boot, and when Rem checks, he actually finds it there. Rem becomes furious and accuses him of putting it there, but Encrid dismisses him and explains that he simply saw the insect crawl inside earlier. Deep inside, Encrid realizes this is already the 18th time he has witnessed the bug's crushed corpse, and he begins wondering whether repeating the same day enough times might eventually help him escape this endless cycle. As the day continues, Encrid reflects on his past and remembers how his dream first began. When he was young, he trained under a retired mercenary who happened to visit his village. The old warrior praises his dedication and tells him that he has the potential to become a knight someday. Those words ignite a powerful dream inside Encrid's heart. He begins imagining himself as a legendary knight, capable of defeating entire armies alone and changing the outcome of wars like the heroes from traveling songs and stories. Believing himself destined for greatness, he leaves his village behind to chase that dream. However, reality quickly crushes his fantasies. After joining a mercenary group, Encrid becomes the target of constant ridicule. Other soldiers mock him for being weak and cowardly, even laughing about the time he became frightened by a stray dog. They insist that someone like him could never become a knight and is not even worthy of being an ordinary mercenary. Even so, Encrid refuses to surrender his dream. He convinces himself that hard work can overcome a lack of talent, and he spends years training harder than everyone else around him. Through endless effort, he slowly gains experience, strength, and endurance. The people around him eventually begin acknowledging his persistence, and Encrid starts believing that his dream may actually come true. But that hope is shattered after he encounters a young child in a village where he is stationed. The 12-year-old boy has only practiced swordsmanship for 6 months, yet during their duel the child completely overwhelms him. That humiliating defeat breaks something inside Encrid. He realizes that the genius of a talented child surpasses over a decade of his painful effort. For the first time, he truly wonders whether hard work alone can ever defeat natural talent. Even then, he refuses to completely abandon his goal. He continues training while reducing his time for eating and sleeping, convincing himself that even if he never becomes a knight, he can at least become an experienced soldier. 3 years later, Encrid now serves in the Cyprus Division as the commander of a weak second-rate squad. Although this is the highest position he achieves after years of effort, he still considers it better than wandering around as a mercenary without purpose. As the familiar day begins once more, Encrid asks another soldier named Jackson to cover his morning duties. Meanwhile, Rem comments about Jackson's fierce personality. Encrid then asks Rem to teach him the technique called Heart of the Beast once again. Rem seems surprised because Encrid previously gave up on learning it, but Encrid insists on trying again. Soon, the battle between Naulilia and Aspen begins exactly like every previous loop. Encrid remembers dying countless times on this battlefield and reviving at the start of the same day over and over again. Each time he repeats the loop, he relearns Heart of the Beast from Rem, but even after all those attempts, he still cannot avoid the fatal stab that always kills him. Now, on his 21st repetition of the battle, he memorizes every movement happening around him. He predicts attacks before they happen, dodges a spear aimed at his back, and avoids another strike coming from behind. Then he remembers that a soldier named Vel is about to die. In every previous loop, Vel dies moments after surviving the first arrow. This time, however, Encrid successfully saves him. Accomplishing even this small change fills him with hope because it proves the future can be altered. Finally, Encrid reaches the enemy swordsman, who has killed him 20 times already. He remembers Rem's teachings about Heart of the Beast, which involve facing death without fear like a wild animal. Rem explains that hesitation on the battlefield leads directly to death, and a true beast survives because it never allows fear to control its actions. As the enemy thrusts his sword forward again, Encrid focuses carefully on the blade. Instead of panicking, he accepts death itself as something that strengthens him. For the first time in 21 attempts, he successfully dodges the fatal stab. Although the enemy attacks again immediately afterward, Encrid feels genuine progress for the first time since becoming trapped in the endless day. The mysterious figure appears once more and encourages him to give up and accept his weakness peacefully, but Encrid completely rejects those words. He refuses to surrender no matter how many times he dies because this time, he finally sees the enemy's sword clearly and survives. Then the loop resets once again. Encrid wakes up back in the camp, while Rem repeats the same morning greeting. Yet this time, Encrid feels different. Even though the cycle continues, he realizes he is finally moving forward one small step at a time, and on the 22nd day, he prepares to challenge fate once again. Encrid reaches the battlefield once again and realizes this is already the 33rd time he faces the same deadly enemy. After dying over and over again to the exact same attack, he finally begins seeing the enemy's sword clearly. He carefully watches the movement of the blade and convinces himself that this time he can dodge before the stab reaches his throat. However, the enemy suddenly moves much faster than expected and attacks again before Encrid can fully react. As Encrid falls back in pain, a small charm hanging around his neck drops onto the ground. The sight of the charm immediately brings back memories from his days as a wandering mercenary. During that time, he occasionally accepted requests to hunt dangerous monsters threatening villages. He was never forced to help anyone, but because of his dream of becoming a knight, he always believed protecting weak people was his duty. One day, after helping a poor village survive a monster attack, an old woman offers him a small charm as payment. Even back then, Encrid thinks the reward is almost laughable compared to the risk of losing his life. Still, the old woman explains that the charm can grant the deepest wish of the person carrying it. Remembering those words now, Encrid begins wondering if the mysterious object is somehow responsible for repeating the same day endlessly. Deep inside, he questions whether the charm is forcing him to relive this nightmare so he can eventually become the knight he always dreamed of becoming. Meanwhile, the enemy soldier notices Encrid suffering and mockingly pretends to offer him mercy before delivering another fatal stab. Encrid immediately realizes the man simply enjoys killing people and takes pleasure in watching them suffer. The enemy attacks again, and the loop resets once more. Encrid wakes up in the military camp yet again. This time, instead of pretending innocence, he openly admits to Rem that he placed the insect inside the boot himself. Rem becomes furious and thinks Encrid has finally lost his mind. Ignoring the reaction completely, Encrid immediately drags Rem outside and demands another lesson on the technique called Heart of the Beast. During training, Rem becomes shocked because Encrid's instincts improve far too quickly. Rem notices that Encrid suddenly reacts with far greater composure during dangerous situations, almost as if he has gained years of battle experience overnight. Although Rem finds it impossible to believe, Encrid already learns these lessons through countless deaths and repeated battles. Even though Heart of the Beast is supposed to be a secret technique passed down through Rem's family, Encrid continues mastering it little by little every time the day resets. He begins understanding that the technique is not about skill alone, but about developing a fearless mentality, similar to a wild animal that does not hesitate in front of death. Still, Encrid realizes survival alone is not enough. Even if he learns how to avoid the enemy's attacks, he cannot win unless he learns how to strike back properly. During sparring sessions, he practices the only sword style he truly knows, the Valen mercenary sword technique. The style is considered unusual and dishonorable by many swordsmen because it focuses more on practical killing methods than elegant movements. Even so, it remains the best technique Encrid possesses. While practicing with Rem, Encrid attempts a thrust that accidentally resembles the deadly stab used by the enemy soldier who kills him repeatedly. Because he experiences that attack more than 10 times, his body slowly memorizes the exact movement naturally. Rem instantly notices the improvement and comments that the stab finally carries some real danger behind it. However, Rem also points out Encrid's biggest weakness. Deep inside, Encrid lacks confidence in his own sword. Every attack he makes carries hesitation because he constantly doubts himself and fears failure. Rem explains in his rough and simple way that a proper killing strike must carry complete certainty. A swordsman must attack believing the enemy cannot possibly survive. Only then can the sword maintain its full power without hesitation weakening the strike. Those words deeply affect Encrid. He finally understands the true difference between his own attacks and the enemy's terrifying stab. The enemy never hesitates for even a moment, while Encrid constantly fears failure before his attack even lands. To overcome this weakness, Encrid pushes himself beyond human limits. Day after day, the endless loop continues repeating. On the 111th day, he still dies. On the 123rd day, he still fails again. Yet with every death, every stab, and every painful reset, his body slowly absorbs more experience. Instead of giving up, Encrid continues advancing little by little, even if it is only a quarter of a step at a time. Finally, on the 124th day, something changes. During another brutal training session, Encrid practices until both of his hands tear open and bleed heavily from gripping the sword too hard. Despite the pain, he suddenly begins laughing like a madman. At that moment, after experiencing the enemy's killing technique through more than 100 deaths, Encrid finally succeeds in mastering the perverted swordsman's deadly stab for himself. On the battlefield, Encrid faces the same terrifying enemy once again, while repeating the same deadly day for the 125th time. After experiencing countless painful deaths, he focuses completely on the enemy's movements and reminds himself that his stab must become faster and filled with pure killing intent. His first attack attempt still fails, but unlike before, he no longer panics. He refuses to blink, refuses to release his sword, and carefully memorizes every clash between their blades. The enemy quickly overpowers him again and notices the suffering on Encrid's face. Just like every previous loop, the enemy prepares to finish him with another stab while pretending to show mercy. However, this time Encrid calmly warns him that tomorrow he will die instead. Deep down, Encrid realizes those words are meaningless because tomorrow does not exist inside this endless cycle. The enemy immediately mocks him and reminds him that dead people have no tomorrow before striking him down once again. The loop resets, and Encrid wakes up back in the military camp. This time, he casually informs Rem about the insect crawling into his boot before it even happens. Since Encrid has already repeated this morning over 100 times, he knows every tiny detail perfectly. Rem becomes grateful after discovering the bug exactly where Encrid predicted, but Encrid immediately uses the opportunity to push his guard duty onto him instead. Rem feels confused because Encrid suddenly acts much more commanding and forceful than usual. Encrid then approaches another squad member and orders him to gather shin armor, a shield, and a dagger for him. Although the soldier complains about doing favors, he still agrees because Encrid is his squad leader. Nearby, Rem and the others continue noticing how strange Encrid behaves today. Unlike the weak and hesitant man they normally know, he now acts intense, focused, and strangely confident. While training, Encrid reflects deeply on the endless nightmare trapping him. Every death causes unbearable pain, and he begins wondering how long this cycle may continue. He fears the possibility of dying thousands, or even tens of thousands more times without ever escaping. At the same time, he questions what will happen if he finally survives the battle. Perhaps tomorrow will finally arrive, or maybe he will still wake up to the same cursed day forever. Despite these fears, Encrid realizes he has already grown far stronger than before. However, he refuses to settle for small progress. He believes this repeating day is a blessing disguised as suffering, because it allows him to continue improving without limits. Since he finally learns the enemy's deadly stabbing technique, he becomes determined to keep moving forward no matter how painful the process becomes. As the battle begins once more, Encrid carefully recalls every deadly mistake from his previous loops. On the 46th day, a spiked mace crushes his shoulder. On the 47th day, he dodges the mace only to have another soldier smash his head moments later. On the 71st day, an enemy slices off his foot before he can even confront the swordsman who always kills him. On the 89th day, an axe splits his skull apart from a distance. Because of these countless deaths, Encrid now perfectly memorizes the battlefield. He understands exactly which enemies must die first, and which attacks must be avoided. After practicing throwing weapons throughout his endless repetitions, he easily eliminates enemies who previously interrupted his fight. Even the dangerous sharpshooter known as the Claw of the Hawk no longer catches him off guard. Finally, after overcoming every obstacle leading up to this moment, Encrid once again faces the enemy swordsman, who serves as the wall blocking his progress. This time, however, his fighting style completely changes. Instead of relying only on dodging and stabbing, he combines everything he learns throughout his countless deaths. Although the enemy possesses incredible natural talent and strength comparable to a genius, Encrid notices a weakness hidden beneath that talent. The enemy lacks true battlefield experience and becomes easily surprised by unfamiliar attacks. Encrid takes advantage of this weakness by using the unpredictable Valen mercenary sword technique, which contains countless strange variations and deceptive movements. During the battle, the enemy becomes confused because Encrid suddenly changes his approach mid-attack. What initially appears to be a reckless charge instantly transforms into a defensive block. Thanks to the enemy's confusion, Encrid finally gains control of the fight for the first time. As their swords clash repeatedly, Encrid realizes he now completely understands the enemy's deadly stabbing technique. Every movement, every timing, and every weakness becomes clear to him after experiencing it through more than 100 deaths. At the perfect moment, Encrid successfully dodges the fatal stab once again and counters immediately. He strikes the enemy's sword with enough force to break it apart completely. For the first time since becoming trapped inside the endless day, Encrid realizes he has finally surpassed the wall standing in his path. Without hesitation, he drives his blade directly through the enemy's neck and repeats the same mocking words about mercy that the swordsman always uses against him. At that moment, Encrid finally believes he wins. However, before he can fully celebrate his victory, another terrifying figure suddenly appears and attacks him from nowhere. Rem watches the scene unfold in horror and realizes the new enemy is not human at all, but a monstrous frog-like creature entering the battlefield unexpectedly. After finally defeating the swordsman who kills him countless times, Encrid suddenly faces an even more terrifying enemy. A giant frog warrior appears on the battlefield and reveals that he personally trains the dead swordsman for a long time. The frog cannot believe that someone as weak as Encrid manages to defeat his disciple. Without wasting another second, the monster immediately attacks with overwhelming force and attempts to kill Encrid on the spot. However, before the attack can land, Rem jumps in front of Encrid and blocks the strike. The battlefield instantly turns chaotic as the two powerful warriors begin clashing against each other. At the same time, another enemy soldier tries taking advantage of the situation to finish off the exhausted Encrid, but Jackson suddenly arrives and saves him before the attack reaches him. While fighting the frog warrior, Rem fiercely protects Encrid and refuses to let anyone touch his squad commander. The frog becomes confused because he originally assumes Rem is the leader due to his overwhelming strength. Inside his mind, Rem realizes the enemy belongs to the warrior race known as the Frogs, a race naturally born for battle. He understands that defeating such a monster will not be easy. In order to win, he either needs to burn the creature with magic or pierce its heart in a single decisive strike. Meanwhile, The frog warrior also becomes cautious after realizing Rem's true strength. He cannot understand why someone so powerful participates in a minor battlefield like this one. The frog even concludes that killing Rem would require risking his own life. After judging the situation carefully, the frog finally decides the battle is no longer worth continuing. Soon after, the enemy forces begin retreating from the battlefield. The soldiers panic and desperately order everyone to fall back while Encred lies motionless on the ground, barely conscious after surviving the brutal fight. As Encred slowly drifts in and out of consciousness, the mysterious voice haunting him appears once again. The voice acknowledges that Encred finally survives a single day, but warns him that many greater walls still wait ahead. According to the voice, Encred's fate is to eventually fall into despair and abandon his ambitions after failing to overcome those impossible obstacles. Even in his weakened state, Encred refuses to accept those words. Deep inside, he believes walls only exist to be overcome. The mysterious being becomes interested in Encred's determination and eagerly waits for the moment when the greed and ambition shining inside his eyes finally disappear forever. Suddenly, Encred wakes up and notices that everything around him feels different. Instead of returning to the same morning once again, he finds himself inside the infirmary tent. For a moment, he cannot even process what happens. Rem explains that Encred remains unconscious for 2 entire days after the battle and reminds him that he saves him from the frog warrior. Encred slowly realizes the truth. For the first time since the nightmare begins, the day actually moves forward instead of resetting. He survives and reaches a completely new tomorrow. Even though his body aches terribly, he feels shocked and relieved knowing the endless loop finally breaks. Rem jokes around while checking on him and confirms that although Encred's head suffers serious damage, none of his bones are broken. Their conversation quickly turns into playful arguing, showing how much closer they become after fighting together through the battle. Soon afterward, a man named Kreis enters the infirmary and complains about the money he spends to get Encred proper treatment. Encred immediately realizes that an ordinary soldier like him normally would never receive a place inside the infirmary tent. Kreis demands repayment with interest, while Encred notices that the man is still nowhere to be found during the actual battle itself. Later, Jackson quietly visits Encred and hands him a special ointment for his injuries. Encred instantly recognizes it as the same medicine Jackson usually keeps for himself. Since Jackson normally hates sharing personal belongings, Encred becomes surprised by the unexpected kindness. Other squad members also begin taking turns checking on him. Even Auden appears emotional while visiting him. Encred finds the situation strangely uncomfortable because his squad normally acts selfishly and ignores him most of the time. For the first time, he begins wondering if these troublesome soldiers genuinely care about him. At one point, Ragna briefly enters the infirmary and casually asks why Encred is lying there, before immediately leaving again. Encred quickly dismisses the idea that Ragna could actually be worried about him because the man never shows concern for anyone. While resting, Encred notices 2 other injured soldiers inside the infirmary. One is a platoon commander from another company who frequently picks fights with him in the past. The other is an unknown low-ranking soldier who spends his time silently staring into space. Encred becomes curious about how such an ordinary soldier manages to enter the infirmary tent reserved for more important people. Then, the atmosphere suddenly changes when a beautiful elf woman walks into the tent and asks for the commander of the 444th Squad. The moment Encred sees her, his curiosity immediately grows as a completely new situation begins unfolding before him. A mysterious elf woman suddenly appears in front of the soldiers, and one man stares at her in shock because her appearance looks almost like a fairy. The atmosphere immediately becomes tense as she questions which group he belongs to. The nervous soldier quickly introduces himself as Vengeance, the commander of the 3rd platoon in the 2nd company. But the elf woman coldly points out that he forgets proper military manners by introducing his rank before showing respect to a superior officer. The pressure from her presence instantly crushes his confidence, and he hurriedly apologizes. Encred quietly watches the exchange and finally realizes that this woman is the newly appointed commander of the 4th company. Unlike the others, he calmly introduces himself as the commander of the 4th squad under the 4th platoon. The elf commander studies him for a moment before acknowledging the rumors about how well he handles the troublesome members of his squad. She briefly expresses her expectations for his future contributions before turning away as if that is all she came for. Encred becomes confused because the meeting feels strangely short and meaningless. almost as if she came only to observe something. Before leaving, the elf commander questions another soldier standing nearby. The man responds with the strange name Krang, though even Encrid immediately suspects that the name is fake. The soldier's casual attitude toward such a high-ranking officer feels unnatural, and Encrid starts wondering if Krang might secretly be some noble hiding his identity. Despite the awkward interaction, the elf commander simply leaves without creating trouble, but her sudden appearance leaves a strange feeling hanging in the air. Later, Encrid notices that most of the pain from his injuries has faded away, allowing him to move properly again. Instead of resting, he decides to return to training immediately, because he knows surviving on the battlefield requires constant improvement. Vengeance criticizes him for acting tough despite being one of the weakest-ranking soldiers around, but Encrid ignores the insults while Krang silently watches the situation unfold. At the training grounds, Encrid begins mentally recreating the previous battle in his head. He remembers an expensive combat method he learned long ago, a technique where a fighter repeatedly replays battles to discover mistakes and improve future reactions. As he analyzes the fight, he realizes how dangerous his final desperate attack truly was. If that single strike had failed, he would have died instantly. He understands that relying everything on one finishing move is reckless because one mistake means death. Since Rem's axe attacks are overwhelmingly lethal, Encrid starts thinking about what action should come after his strongest sword thrust, rather than depending entirely on one attack. While he practices, Krang approaches him with curiosity. He admits that Encrid looked strange earlier because his hands kept twitching inside the barracks, and now he stands outside staring blankly into space. Encrid explains that he is training his grip strength while mentally reproducing the battle in detail. Krang then asks why he pushes himself so hard. Encrid bluntly answers that he trains simply so he does not get destroyed and killed. Krang continues questioning him, asking whether preserving his life serves some greater purpose. That question forces Encrid to think deeply about the dream he has always hidden from others. Throughout his life, people constantly mocked his ambition because his natural talent appears far too low to ever achieve it. Even so, he never abandons the dream inside his heart. For the first time, he openly admits that he wants to become a knight. Instead of laughing like everyone else, Krang simply listens seriously. That reaction alone shocks Encrid because nobody has ever treated his dream with genuine respect before. Krang casually mentions that he finally understands something important after observing Encrid's determination. He then tells Encrid to remember his name if he truly becomes a knight someday. Those simple words unexpectedly affect Encrid deeply, because it is the first time someone sincerely supports his goal instead of mocking it. The moment quietly creates a strange friendship between the two men. The following morning begins chaotically, as Vengeance loudly complains about the delayed breakfast rations, accusing others of planning to eat the good food themselves while leaving scraps behind. Meanwhile, Encrid reflects on the peaceful morning after hearing the wandering minstrel nearby. Rather than rushing back to training, he enjoys a brief walk outside. During this moment, Jackson approaches him and checks on his injuries. Encrid gratefully admits that the medicine works extremely well, and Jackson encourages him to recover quickly and return soon. That night, Krang casually wishes Encrid good night before everyone settles down to sleep. Vengeance continues shouting nonsense at the others, while Encrid quietly reflects on how the entire day passes without anything important happening. However, the next morning immediately feels wrong. Once again, the wandering minstrel appears nearby, and Vengeance repeats the exact same complaint about the delayed breakfast using identical words from yesterday. At first, Encrid feels irritated by the noise, but then a horrifying realization strikes him. Every event unfolds exactly the same way as before. Even Jackson repeats the same conversation about his injuries word for word. Encrid suddenly becomes certain that he is reliving the same day again. He remembers mysterious words warning him that another wall would stop him, and that survival itself would become the next challenge. Slowly, he realizes that he must have died during the night without even noticing it. Instead of panicking, Encrid becomes more determined. If he died once, then he simply needs to uncover how it happened before dying again. He begins carefully analyzing the possibilities. For someone to infiltrate the medical barracks, bypass all defenses, and kill him silently, the assassin must possess extraordinary stealth. Knights seem unlikely, meaning the killer probably hides among the soldiers themselves. Encrid immediately suspects the elf commander because fairies and elves possess naturally light footsteps, and incredible agility perfect for assassination work. He even suspects that her earlier visit was actually reconnaissance to locate the medical barracks in advance. Determined to expose the truth, Encrid waits inside the barracks and plans to scream the moment he sees the assassin entering. Since there is only one entrance, he believes alerting the others will solve everything instantly. However, before he can react, something suddenly pierces him. A poisonous needle strikes his body so quietly that he never even notices the assassin entering the room. Within moments, powerful paralysis spreads through his entire body, leaving him unable to move or speak. As panic overwhelms him, Encrid realizes this must be the reason he died previously without understanding anything. Completely helpless, he watches the horrifying scene unfold around him. Then he finally spots the hidden assassin responsible for the attack. To his horror, the assassin suddenly stabs Krang without hesitation. At the same moment, Encrid notices another figure nearby and realizes there are actually two assassins working together. The terrifying truth finally becomes clear to him. The Elf Company commander herself is involved in the assassination plot. Encrid wakes up once again to the exact same morning, and this time he realizes that he has already experienced it 3 times in a row. Even while staying alert the entire night, he still fails to sense the assassin's presence even once. The situation becomes more terrifying because he now understands that stopping the assassins alone will not solve everything. After surviving them, he would still have to face the mysterious company commander, who is most likely involved in the killings herself. For a moment, Encrid feels completely helpless, and the frustration reminds him of the hopeless feeling he experienced during the previous battle. However, he quickly forces himself to calm down because he remembers that he still managed to win back then despite overwhelming odds. As long as he refuses to give up, he believes there must be some way to survive. This time, Encrid immediately wakes Vengeance and tries to act differently from the previous loops. Vengeance becomes irritated by his strange behavior and starts calling him insane. Meanwhile, Encrid carefully thinks through the situation and realizes that he may have been wrong to assume the assassins had already infiltrated the camp so early. Instead of only watching inside the tent, he decides he should pay attention to possible threats coming from outside as well. Vengeance continues mocking him during training, sarcastically comparing his sword practice to hunting cockroaches. Encrid responds with sarcasm of his own, though Vengeance completely misses the point and explodes in anger anyway. Their loud argument quickly attracts Krang, who casually arrives and wonders if he should return later instead of interrupting them. Encrid tells him to stay, while Vengeance angrily complains about both of them being annoying. As the conversation continues, Encrid secretly studies Krang more carefully than before. Since the assassins targeted Krang directly during the previous loops, Encrid becomes certain that this mysterious soldier is somehow connected to something extremely important. Even though Krang behaves suspiciously, Encrid does not want to forcefully expose someone's secrets without reason. Still, because the assassins attacked him due to his connection with Krang, Encrid feels justified in asking questions this time. Unfortunately, his social skills completely fail him. Instead of asking carefully, he bluntly asks Krang what he really is. The moment the words leave his mouth, Encrid immediately regrets how awkward the question sounds and internally compares his conversational ability to Rem's terrible communication style. Krang reacts with visible discomfort and admits that he cannot explain his identity because the story behind it is too complicated. Surprisingly, Encrid simply accepts the vague answer without pressing further. Vengeance immediately loses his temper after witnessing such a ridiculous exchange. He angrily points out that asking such a suspicious question becomes meaningless if Encrid refuses to demand a proper explanation afterward. Then he turns his attention toward Krang and directly accuses him of being a foreign spy because of his strange manners and behavior. Krang calmly responds that he has never betrayed the kingdom and never intends to do so. While listening carefully, Encrid studies Krang's eyes and movements. Something about his presence resembles the aura of a knight. However, Encrid also remembers how helpless Krang looked when the assassins attacked in previous loops. That contradiction confuses him deeply. Krang clearly hides something important, but whatever it is, it does not seem connected to the assassins themselves. That night, Krang casually wishes Encrid goodnight again, before everyone settles down. Encrid notices that Vengeance strangely stays quiet after the earlier argument, almost as if he feels uncomfortable around Krang now. At the same time, Encrid cannot stop thinking about the danger closing in around them. If the assassins invade the tent again, Everyone inside will die before they can even react. Unable to stay calm any longer, Encrid suddenly wakes up Vengeance in the middle of the night and desperately warns him that assassins will soon invade the tent. He urges him to cooperate if he wants to survive. Predictably, Vengeance dismisses everything as nonsense and assumes Encrid has finally gone completely insane. Before Encrid can explain further, an attack suddenly begins. The assassin moves so quickly that Encrid barely notices the strike before chaos erupts inside the tent. Within moments, every soldier inside is slaughtered before anyone can properly defend themselves. Encrid wakes up once again at the beginning of the same morning, and this time he realizes it is already the fourth repetition. Since he possesses no evidence proving the assassins exist, he understands that neither Vengeance nor Krang will ever believe his warnings. Because of that, he decides to seek help from higher-ranking officers instead. Unfortunately, that attempt fails immediately. The superior officer harshly dismisses him as a lunatic and threatens to silence him permanently if he continues spreading insane stories about assassins. Once again, Encrid is left completely alone. That night, he changed tactics again. Instead of trying to convince others, he decides to predict the exact moment the assassins appear and scream for help at the last second. He anxiously waits in complete darkness, trying to guess when the invisible attack will come. Every tiny sound makes him tense with fear, as he repeatedly wonders whether the attack is happening now or not yet. Finally, believing the moment has arrived, he prepares himself. But the assassins still move far faster than his reactions. Before he can do anything meaningful, another sudden strike lands against him. Encrid realizes with despair that the assassin's speed completely surpasses his own. No matter how many times he repeats the loop, he dies before properly reacting. The cycle continues over and over again. Each attempt ends in failure. Encrid gradually accepts that nobody else can help him. The only way to survive is by ambushing the assassins before they act. However, that idea creates another impossible problem. He cannot fight enemies he cannot even see. The assassins always know exactly where he is, while he remains blind to their movements. As long as he cannot avoid the poisonous needle that paralyzes him instantly, he will continue dying helplessly. By the 20th repetition of the same morning, exhaustion and frustration begin crushing his mind. He realizes that he has already died 20 times without making any meaningful progress. Still, he refuses to break completely. Instead, he narrows his focus toward one goal. Before defeating the assassins, he first needs a method to avoid the poison needle itself. While thinking desperately for an answer, he suddenly remembers something Rem once said about Jackson. According to Rem, Jackson fights like a filthy wildcat because he never confronts enemies directly. Instead, he prefers attacking from blind spots before escaping immediately afterward. The description instantly reminds Encrid of the assassins hunting him. Not long after, Jackson approaches and politely checks whether Encrid's injuries have recovered. Encrid carefully studies him and realizes that Jackson would probably defeat the assassins easily using his own underhanded fighting style. However, Encrid knows he cannot rely on others forever. This challenge is a wall he must overcome himself. With that realization, Encrid decides on a new approach. If he cannot overpower the assassins, then he must learn to think exactly like them. Quietly, he asks Jackson what someone would need to do in order to survive one of his ambushes. Jackson calmly admits that nobody has ever managed to survive them before. Encrid becomes shocked after hearing Jackson explain that surviving an ambush requires having eyes on the back of his head. Completely confused, he immediately wonders what that strange phrase even means. Instead of answering directly, Jackson points toward a wagon standing behind the tents and calmly predicts that it is about to break apart. Encrid cannot understand what he is talking about at first, especially because the wagon stands extremely far away. Before he can question it further, the wagon suddenly collapses exactly as Jackson predicted. The sight completely stuns Encrid. For a moment, he honestly wonders whether Jackson possesses some kind of supernatural ability or prophetic power. Jackson quickly dismisses the idea and jokingly blames Encrid for spending too much time around barbarians like Rem. Still frustrated and confused, Encrid demands a real explanation. Jackson finally reveals that he simply heard the wagon's axle creaking from the strain. By listening carefully to the surrounding sounds, he predicts what will happen before it actually occurs. That explanation leaves Encrid speechless because he never even notices the wagon approaching in the first place, much less hears tiny noises coming from its axle. Jackson then explains the true meaning behind his earlier statement. A fighter does not need physical sight alone to sense danger. By sharpening hearing and isolating sounds from the environment, a person can become aware of everything happening nearby. According to Jackson, constant practice allows someone to separate specific sounds from the endless noise surrounding them. Encrid quickly notices that Jackson suddenly becomes far more talkative and helpful compared to before. Usually, Jackson acts too lazy to explain anything seriously, but now he willingly gives detailed advice. Jackson admits that teaching Encrid properly feels easier than dealing with someone who stubbornly refuses to give up. Deep down, he recognizes Encrid's relentless determination. That night, Encrid begins a completely different kind of training. Instead of practicing sword swings or combat techniques, he quietly sits alone and focuses entirely on listening. He reflects on the terrifying wall standing before him, the invisible assassins he calls faceless death. He realizes survival depends on sensing their presence before they strike. Slowly, he starts separating ordinary sounds from one another. He notices the footsteps of patrolling soldiers, the crackling flames of nearby torches, and the movement of tents swaying in the wind. At the same time, he desperately searches for the unfamiliar sound belonging to the hidden assassin. Unfortunately, even with all his concentration, another attack suddenly arrives before he can react. Once again, he dies without successfully detecting the enemy. The moment he wakes up, frustration hits him hard, but something feels different this time. Even though he keeps failing, his body clearly remembers every previous attempt. All the experiences from his repeated deaths gradually build inside him. Jackson's earlier lessons continue echoing inside his mind. He remembers how Jackson explains that sound alone provides enormous amounts of information. The intensity and direction of sound reveal the location of nearby objects, while faint noises expose movements from far away. Once someone masters this ability, hearing itself becomes a second pair of eyes. Jackson also explains that sound behaves like waves constantly spreading in every direction. Among thousands of overlapping sound waves, a person must isolate a single one to uncover hidden information. Encrid fully dedicates himself to understanding that concept. He begins categorizing every sound around him one by one. The waving flags no longer sound like a single object, but separate into multiple movements. He carefully counts them and distinguishes which ones stand nearby and which ones move farther away. Little by little, he starts recognizing familiar sounds, while searching for anything unnatural hiding among them. During one of these training sessions, Krang unexpectedly approaches him. Since Encrid sits silently with his eyes closed, Krang becomes curious about the strange exercise. Encrid sarcastically claims he is merely sitting around like an idiot rather than training. However, Krang immediately rejects that idea, because he knows Encrid is not the type of person who wastes time meaninglessly. The deadly cycle continues for dozens of repetitions afterward. Every single night ends with another failure. The assassins continue killing him before he fully identifies their presence. The 33rd attempt ends no differently. Then the number rises even higher until he reaches the 134th repetition. Again and again, Encrid hears nothing before dying. Failure after failure slowly crushes him, but he refuses to stop. Eventually, he reaches an important realization. He does not need miracles, sudden enlightenment, or divine intervention to overcome this challenge. The only thing he truly needs is endless repetition and relentless effort. As long as he keeps practicing the same process repeatedly, improvement will eventually come. One day, Krang secretly sneaks up behind him during training, hoping to surprise him. However, before Krang can get close, Encrid already notices his presence, despite keeping his eyes closed. Krang becomes genuinely impressed and immediately realizes Encrid has been training his perception all this time. Finally, during another assassination attempt, everything changes. The hidden assassin launches the usual surprise attack from the darkness, fully expecting another effortless kill. But this time, Encrid senses the movement. At the last possible moment, he successfully dodges the strike. After suffering through endless deaths against an invisible enemy, Encrid finally faces the assassin directly and realizes the faceless death standing before him is no longer invisible anymore. The assassin immediately launches another attack after realizing Encrid successfully avoids the poisonous needle for the first time. Furious that his invisible killing technique no longer works perfectly, the assassin charges forward while calling Encrid a rat. Even though the enemy remains dangerous, Encrid quickly notices something important during the exchange. Compared to Jackson, The assassin's close combat skills are far weaker. Jackson's ambushes feel impossible to survive, but this assassin relies too heavily on stealth and poison. That realization gives Encred confidence, because he finally believes he can win this fight directly. At the same time, Encred carefully checks the situation around him. Vengeance already collapses from the poison attack and appears dead, but Krang still survives somehow. Even so, Encred refuses to lower his guard because the assassin remains an experienced killer capable of ending lives in seconds. The assassin attacks repeatedly, but Encred now dodges the strikes, using the sharpened senses he develops through countless loops of training and death. During the battle, Encred suddenly notices the ferry company commander nearby. The moment he sees her, all the suspicions from the previous loops return to his mind. Since he still believes she works together with the assassin, he decides that hesitation means death. Without wasting another second, he rushes toward her first, determined to strike before she can attack him. However, at the last moment, he catches sight of Krang and loses focus for only an instant. That tiny distraction ruins his attack completely. The elf commander effortlessly avoids his strike without counterattacking. In that moment, Encred realizes something shocking. She is not assisting the assassin at all. Instead, she actually arrives to protect everyone inside the tent. The sudden revelation completely changes the situation. Realizing he misunderstands everything, Encred instantly redirects his attention toward the real assassin. He rushes forward to attack again, but the assassin quickly understands that the mission has failed. Rather than risking death, the man immediately escapes into the darkness before Encred can stop him. As the tension settles slightly, Krang quietly reveals that the assassin most likely targets him from the beginning. Encred admits he already figures that out because there is no logical reason for someone to hire professional assassins just to eliminate ordinary soldiers like himself or Vengeance. The elf commander praises Encred for understanding the situation so quickly, but her calm attitude creates another realization in his mind. Since her involvement cannot become public knowledge, she probably cannot allow witnesses to spread rumors about what truly happens here. Before things become more dangerous, Krang makes a request to the elf commander. He asks her to spare everyone's lives because he does not want anyone else dying tonight. The elf commander surprisingly agrees immediately. Krang then points out that Vengeance still survives despite collapsing earlier. The elf commander explains that an antidote exists for the poison, meaning he should recover safely. Encred quietly notices another detail from her response. The elf commander clearly possesses deep knowledge about poisons and antidotes, which only strengthens the mystery surrounding her identity. Meanwhile, Krang focuses on another problem entirely. Since an assassin infiltrates the medical tent, the entire incident could create massive chaos if discovered by the army. They need to erase all traces of the attack before sunrise. Encred quickly proposes the simplest solution possible. Soon afterward, flames erupt across the medical tent, and soldiers everywhere begin panicking over the sudden fire. Amid the chaos, people discover 2 survivors rescued from the burning area. Thanks to the fire, all evidence connected to the assassins disappears completely. The remaining soldiers assume the destruction results from an unfortunate accident rather than a secret assassination attempt. Later, the elf commander privately comments that Krang would certainly have died if Encred had not accidentally slowed the assassin during the fight. She wonders whether Krang changes his mind about something because of Encred's actions. Krang quietly admits that Encred truly interests him now. Deep down, he realizes he can no longer avoid whatever responsibilities wait for him in the future. Before leaving, he silently hopes they will meet again someday, while standing on opposite sides of their respective duties. After finally surviving the repeating day, Encred wakes up to the next morning for the first time in what feels like forever. He reflects on everything he experiences while confronting the silent death haunting him through countless loops. Although he successfully learns to sense most dangers around him, he still cannot detect the ferry commander's presence at all. That alone reminds him how much stronger she remains compared to him. Since he escapes without serious injuries this time, Encred prepares to return to his original squad immediately. Before leaving, Vengeance awkwardly questions why Encred bothers saving his life from the fire, despite all the insults and abuse he constantly throws at him. Confused by the hostility, Encred simply answers that comrades do not need special reasons to save each other. Vengeance becomes strangely quiet after hearing that response. Eventually, he warns Encred that returning to the squad will not be pleasant because terrible rumors now spread across the entire military base. According to the soldiers, the camp itself becomes cursed. As Encrid watches his chaotic squad members fighting again in the distance, he bitterly concludes that the real curse might simply be those troublesome idiots themselves. Encrid reflects that 4 full days passed since returning to his original squad after surviving the endless assassination loop. Life inside the camp slowly returns to normal, but he does not waste a single moment relaxing. Early every morning, he wakes before sunrise to continue training his body and senses. One morning, Jackson quietly prepares to leave the tent without disturbing anyone, but Encrid is already awake and ready to exercise. Jackson notices the improvement immediately and praises Encrid for adapting to sound training surprisingly fast, despite only recently beginning the practice. Encrid explains that he keeps training constantly because battles become rare as winter approaches. Since large-scale fighting slows down during the colder season, he plans to use every spare moment to strengthen himself instead of wasting time. Jackson encourages him to continue sharpening his senses because the skill will eventually save his life again someday. Not long afterward, Auden greets Encrid warmly after his workout. The massive warrior praises his dedication and reminds him that a properly trained body becomes a weapon by itself. Auden jokingly points out that Encrid still looks too thin and weak, especially compared to someone gigantic like him. Deep down, Encrid cannot help thinking that Auden is simply absurdly huge rather than him being especially small. Even so, he agrees to continue improving and remembers the special training methods Auden teaches him earlier. As the morning continues, Encrid arrives near another loud argument between squad members. Once again, Wanton and Ragna nearly start fighting over something pointless. Encrid immediately tries calming them down before things escalate further. Auden casually remarks that violence solves nothing, though the statement sounds ridiculous considering the people surrounding him. Wanton angrily complains that Ragna's terrible sense of direction will eventually starve everyone because he keeps messing up basic duties. Encrid quickly orders Ragna to start cooking if it is his turn for responsibility. Ragna obediently agrees, while insulting Wanton's smell at the same time. Wanton bizarrely takes the comment as praise instead of an insult. Watching the argument spiral further, Encrid realizes that Wanton only picks fights because boredom is driving him insane. With no real battles happening lately, Wanton becomes restless and desperate for excitement. Understanding that, Encrid offers him a duel instead of letting him harass random squad members. The two immediately begin sparring against each other. During the fight, Encrid focuses on everything he learns recently. He controls his emotions using the Heart of the Beast technique, while using his sharpened hearing to predict attacks and defend himself. At the same time, he attempts to combine those abilities with the deadly stabbing technique he practices through hundreds of deaths during the assassination loops. Unfortunately, Wanton still completely overwhelms him in direct combat. Despite recognizing how much Encrid improves lately, Wanton quickly grows bored with the same repetitive stabbing style. He criticizes Encrid for relying too heavily on one predictable move instead of developing something new. Even while losing badly, Encrid realizes an important truth. Unlike before, he now possesses the ability to repeat training endlessly through experience and persistence. Even if his skills lag behind everyone else now, he can slowly improve through repetition thousands of times if necessary. Fueled by determination, Encrid boldly declares that next time he will properly defeat Wanton instead of losing so easily again. Wanton internally admits that Encrid's actual combat skills remain unimpressive, but something about his stubborn determination and fearless eyes keeps him interested. Rather than mocking him completely, Wanton challenges him to prove those words by eventually landing a meaningful hit someday. As time passes, strange weather constantly covers the camp. Rain repeatedly starts and stops without warning, creating miserable conditions for everyone. Wanton loudly complains that mushrooms will start growing on his feet at this rate. Nearby soldiers also become frustrated because the constant storms keep interrupting training and duels. Some soldiers even begin spreading rumors that the entire military base becomes cursed. Curious about the strange gossip, Encrid asks what people mean by a curse. Another soldier explains that too many terrible incidents happen recently. Casualties increase, the medical tent catches fire, and several scout squad members become injured one after another. Combined with the unstable weather, these events create fear throughout the camp. Although most soldiers do not truly believe in curses, the strange timing of everything fuels the rumors further. Encrid remains calm and points out that higher-ranking officers would never ignore something suspicious happening inside the base. Even so, the atmosphere around camp becomes increasingly tense and uneasy. During another heavy rainstorm, Encrid stands near the entrance of the tent, focusing entirely on listening to the sound of rainfall. When another soldier asks why he trains outside during such terrible weather, Encrid explains that the downpour itself makes the practice valuable. The overwhelming noise forces him to sharpen his hearing even further. Wanton mocks him again by comparing him to a stray cat wandering through the rain, but Jackson unexpectedly supports the training method and praises Encrid's dedication. Wanton becomes shocked that Jackson suddenly cares about helping the squad leader at all. Meanwhile, Encrid struggles to focus because the tent becomes unbearably loud from everyone talking at once. Even the sound of rain nearly disappears beneath the noise. Despite that, something slowly changes within the squad. Auden offers additional training exercises Encrid can practice while lying down inside the tent. Ragna also volunteers to help improve Encrid's combat stance again. Watching the others support Encrid in their own awkward ways, Wanton quietly realizes that everyone in the squad already notices the same thing he does. Encrid's determination gradually influences all of them. Elsewhere, inside the command meeting, military leaders discuss sending another scouting mission before winter fully arrives. Since several scout members became injured recently, the commanders searched for soldiers capable of filling the missing positions. During the discussion, the ferry company commander unexpectedly recommends Encrid for the scouting mission. Other officers immediately question the decision, because Encrid still carries a reputation as a useless and somewhat foolish squad leader. They worry he might only slow the scouts down instead of helping them. However, the elf commander calmly insists that Encrid could produce unexpected results. When asked why she believes in him so strongly, she mysteriously answers that it is simply a fairy's instinct. Not long afterward, Encrid himself receives the shocking news that he is being assigned to the scouts. Encrid prepares to leave with the scout squad, but the other members of his leftover unit clearly do not like the idea. The soldiers around him keep teasing him and wondering what he could possibly have done to make the company commander personally choose him for this dangerous mission. Even though Encrid acts calm on the outside, he secretly worries that this assignment may not end well for him. Since Krang is already gone, he hopes nobody is planning to get rid of him next. Wanton offers to help him escape the mission, but Encrid immediately refuses. He reminds Wanton that attacking a superior officer is not exactly a smart solution, especially coming from someone who already has a violent reputation. The others around them start acting strangely emotional, almost like Encrid is marching toward his death. Auden dramatically begs for their precious squad leader to be spared, while Ragna even volunteers to take Encrid's place. Encrid quickly rejects the idea, because Ragna is far too reckless for a scouting operation like this. Meanwhile, Wanton and Jackson slowly drift toward another argument. Jackson gives Encrid advice about scouting through tall grass fields. He explains that the first step to surviving an ambush is learning to hear even the smallest disturbance in the movement of the grass. Wanton immediately gets angry because Jackson keeps teaching Encrid strange techniques again. The two look ready to kill each other at any second, and Encrid realizes that nobody will stop them once he leaves. As he watches his chaotic squad members fight, Encrid quietly reflects on his own weakness. Compared to monsters like Wanton and Jackson, he knows he is not particularly strong in direct combat. Ever since joining the army, he constantly gets transferred around because of his mediocre skills. The only place where he finally becomes useful is this squad filled with unwanted leftovers and troublemakers. Even so, he refuses to feel sorry for himself. Instead, he decides that he simply needs to become stronger. Before the fight between Wanton and Jackson can explode, Encrid steps between them and forces both men to calm down. Even then, the insults continue flying back and forth. One threatens to pierce the other's heart, while the other promises to cut off his opponent's head first. Despite all their madness, Encrid understands one thing very clearly. These men are extremely valuable fighters, and the squad cannot afford to lose them. Soon afterward, Encrid joins the official scout squad and heads toward the front lines. He believes this mission may at least help sharpen his senses and improve his awareness. However, the moment he arrives, the scout squad leader Andrew immediately starts acting aggressively toward him. Andrew loudly reminds everyone that, although they share the same rank, he alone commands this scouting operation. He mocks Encrid for leading an outcast squad and insults his abilities in front of the other soldiers. The rest of the scouts quickly join the ridicule, laughing at the idea that Encrid might even know how to properly use a sword. Andrew proudly declares that if they encounter enemies, they will simply smash their skulls in without hesitation. Hearing all this, Encrid immediately notices a huge problem. These men completely misunderstand the purpose of scouting. Instead of staying hidden and gathering information, they behave more like reckless frontline soldiers searching for a fight. As they continue moving through the wilderness, Andrew suddenly discovers tracks on the ground and confidently announces that they belong to Noose. Excited by the thought of catching prey, he orders everyone to follow them so they can enjoy a barbecue later that night. Encrid instantly realizes how absurd this is because Nuss normally travel in groups of at least 20 creatures. Charging after them carelessly would be suicidal. Luckily, another scout named Henri quickly steps in and points out that the tracks actually belong to a gazelle instead. Unlike Andrew, Henri used to work as a hunter in a mountain village, so he understands animals and wilderness survival far better. He also clearly dislikes Andrew's arrogant attitude. Over time, Henri naturally starts talking more with Encrid, and the two gradually become friendly with each other. Henri shares useful hunting knowledge with him, explaining how animals create separate paths while traveling through grassy regions. Encrid quietly absorbs every bit of information because he knows practical experience like this matters far more than empty confidence. Unfortunately, the entire first day becomes a complete waste because Andrew spends hours chasing imaginary Nuss that never existed. Even after failing, Andrew desperately searches for any kind of result to justify his leadership. The next morning, the scout squad finally reaches their official destination, a massive grassland called Green Pearl, also known as the uselessly tall grass field. Their original mission is only to scout the area, observe enemy movement, and report back safely. However, Andrew immediately decides to push deeper into the field so they can capture enemy scouts and earn rewards. Henri becomes uneasy because entering the field itself already feels dangerous enough. Even Encrid expects Andrew to eventually give up after struggling through the thick grass. Surprisingly, Andrew keeps moving forward seriously without complaining once. While advancing carefully, Henri notices something disturbing. Despite the area being full of food, there are almost no animal droppings anywhere nearby. Encrid asks why that matters, and Henri explains that animals normally avoid places occupied by predators or enemies. A land this rich should be crowded with wildlife, yet the entire field feels unnaturally empty. The moment Encrid hears this explanation, his instincts immediately scream danger. Suddenly, he notices movement hidden deep within the grass and instantly orders everyone to get down. A second later, Andrew finally sees the truth for himself. Enemy soldiers are already hiding inside the grass field, waiting silently for them. The reckless scout leader who spent the entire journey boasting about crushing skulls immediately panics. Instead of fighting bravely like before, he desperately tells everyone to run.